Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second summer webinar, Beyond the Exit Ticket, helping students own their learning. This is our second in a series of 5 summer webinars, so thank you all for being here. I'm Kristine Gibson. I'll be hosting today's session. We are going to jump right in. I hope you all have a pen and pencil ready because we are going to be doing some writing today. We're going to jump right in with a question. What I'd like you to do for the first minute of this session is I want you to think about some of the benefits of exit tickets. That is our title of the session is, Beyond the Exit Ticket. So let's start by grounding our knowledge in what do we already know about exit tickets? What are some of the benefits of exit tickets and why are they used? So I'm going to give you a minute. I want you to jot this down on paper, write continuously, and then at the end of the minute, I'm going to ask you to share some of those ideas. So I'm going to start my timer for 1 minute now. Go ahead and get started on writing. We have about 15 seconds left. We're thinking about benefits and uses of exit tickets. Why are we using them? Okay, so now wherever you are in your writing, I want you to pause and I want to now use the chat because I want to kind of see where our heads are when we are thinking about exit tickets. I want you to use the chat. You don't have to copy everything, just 2 or 3 words in the chat that will convey some of the thoughts that you have about exit tickets. Yes, Marcella, I see you definitely have some great ideas there. Getting valuable data about your students, assessing student understanding. I love that you mentioned metacognition. Cheryl, you mentioned getting, a reflection on your own teaching from the student perspective. Definitely really helpful techniques. So let's think about this. We haven't even started our session yet today officially, and we've already got ideas generated. We've already got people thinking, and we've already kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. So we're here to talk about exit tickets, but what you'll notice is that we've kind of reversed that, and we are starting with getting you thinking in very much the way that exit tickets might end a lesson. So let's talk a little bit, as we talk about our session today, let's talk about the benefits of exit tickets. Okay, so the title of the session is Beyond the Exit Ticket. That's what we're all here to talk about. How do we go beyond this? But let's start with what are the benefits of exit tickets? And most of the ideas that I saw pop up in the chat were kind of educator centered. We were looking at how we can get assessment of our students, how we can rethink kind of what our future instruction will be based on reflection. Marcella, you brought in the idea of metacognition, which was one of our learner benefits. Sometimes we think a lot about the teacher benefits of exit tickets and collecting that data, but what we don't always realize is how beneficial they are for students. So when we end our class with having students reflect on their learning, put ideas, show us what they've learned, we're developing some of that metacognition. We're helping students identify some of the gaps where they understand, where they don't. We are increasing the engagement of our students. Think about the last couple minutes of class. How many students are kind of starting to zone out? So that exit ticket is an opportunity to bring them back, give them something to produce in those last few minutes, because I can almost guarantee if you're talking the last few minutes of class, they're not listening. So whatever you're trying to cram in at that time probably isn't getting into their brains. And we're going to talk a little bit more about brain capacity a little bit down the road. But we are thinking about, how we're also building accountability for students. Hey, I was here, I was showing you something, I was modeling. what are you going to give me back? What are you going to show me about your learning? But most of all, what we often don't think about, and I'm always surprised when I go into sessions and teachers haven't heard of this, is this idea of retrieval practice. When we ask students to retrieve, to try to remember, to recall what they are currently learning or have just learned, that actually strengthens the memory. It helps them to implant that memory into the long-term part of their brain, the long-term memory part of their brain, so that they can actually remember longer. So it's not just about getting the right answer to those exit ticket questions. Just the process of doing the thinking and trying to pull that information out is highly beneficial for students. And that's called retrieval practice. If you have an interest in this kind of brain science and how the brain learns and why it learns the way it does, I highly recommend the book Powerful Teaching. It is an excellent and very practical look at the science of learning and how it can be applied in the classroom. And sadly, I find that, again, a lot of us don't have that kind of a training. We have training in pedagogy, and we know our curriculum, but we don't always know the moves that we can be making to help kids learn. So if we've been using exit cards all along, that's awesome. Maybe you didn't realize that you're also engaging retrieval practice in addition to all the benefits you knew about. Okay, so my question for today is, what if we harness this power of the exit ticket, not just at the end of the lesson, but throughout the learning process? When we start harnessing this power earlier in the learning process, we're multiplying the number of opportunities for that retrieval practice. We're multiplying the number of opportunities we have to get data on what our students are learning and to build their metacognition. So we want to think about how we can bring this idea of the exit ticket into the learning that's happening throughout our lessons. And specifically, we want to look at how we're doing that before and during the learning process. So we started this session today by activating our prior knowledge. What do you already know about exit tickets? And that also set the intentions for this session. Now we're moving into the during part of our learning. So we now know, here's why we're here, here's where we're going. I have a feel for what you all know, so I can adjust accordingly. And during the lesson, I'm going to be more thoughtful about how I continue along that path. As we work through this session, I'm going to model for you some of the things we can do during our learning, as we are learning together now, and some of the things that we are going to do after our learning. And when we put those three kind of pieces of the learning process together, we're really building student ownership of learning. So we really want to look at that full picture there. So let's talk about the before learning. So let's think back. We started with a quick write at the beginning of our session today. That was to activate knowledge and set intentions. And that sounds great. If you're interested in the brain science of the thing, when we can make those connections, that's going to help to kind of glue in anything new that comes in. Our brains learn best when we can connect new information to something that's already familiar to us. And it also, brains work really well with kind of having a pattern and understanding like what's coming. We feel more comfortable when we kind of know what's ahead. So when we set that intention, we are also priming students for the learning that's going to happen. Okay, so let's look at some reflections before learning that might work. Now, what you see at the bottom of this slide are 3 kind of unique prompts that you might try with your students in your classrooms. You're going to receive these prompts every time you see this kind of band of prompts. You're going to be getting these as a free resource when we finish this session. So you don't have to scurry to copy these down or anything. You're going to be receiving a handout that has all of these on it. But what you see is this doesn't just have to be, we're going to be learning about, volcanoes. What do you know about volcanoes? We can do this in more creative and interesting ways for our students so that we vary that, so that we're having them bring different things to the table. Okay. But what you hopefully noticed is as we did this at the start of our session today and used the chat to give me that visible thinking, nobody had to raise a hand. Nobody had to unmute themselves and talk, kind of uncomfortably to an unfamiliar group. And everybody was able to produce something that I could see. So we had that visible aspect of learning. So we can make predictions. What do you think is going to happen? That's great in science. That's great when we're talking about conflicts in social studies. This is truly cross-curricular pieces here. What do you think is going to happen in the next chapter of our text? I love Notice, Wonder, and Connect, where you can have students, I love having them look at an image. So thinking about some of these images. So we talked about making a prediction. We talked about notice, wonder, and connect, how you can look at an image like the cell, or like this image of the Gilded Age, or even just a set of fractions, and have students notice, wonder, and make connections between what they're learning, what they already know, and what they're going to be learning. This can surface some of that prior knowledge. It builds up their curiosity. It gets them invested in the learning process. Another super easy one is have them write 3 words. Just 3 words to associate with whatever that image is. And we're, again, getting to kind of see what their level of comfort is with these topics and with these content areas. Okay, so I love this idea of having students reflect before learning, setting the stage. It's kind of like a reverse exit ticket. Okay, when we do this kind of reflection before learning, it sets the stage for our day. But then what happens is even, a lot of teachers do have do nows. If you're thinking this is kind of like a do now, I think that's really beneficial practice that you've already been doing. How can you elevate your do nows using some of these thoughtful prompts rather than just giving them a problem to do, or having them fill in the blank, or having them, do 3 or 4 true or false questions? What if we kind of elevated the level of thinking to the kinds of questions I just shared with you? Once we do that, I want you to tell me, I'm going to show you 2 images, and I want you to think about your typical lesson. We all kind of feel we have to get through it, right? And we kind of, once we start, we are going, kind of like I did today. So my question is, oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. I am really having trouble with my slides today. Oh my goodness. I don't know why my slides are so wonky. What do you see when we think about this image? Oh my gosh. I don't know why this is happening. Wow, I am really having trouble for some reason. Let's see if I can do this. When you see this image, which one represents your classroom? Are we trying to just get as much information out to our students as we can? We're giving them the facts, the details, all the vocabulary, and we are trying to cram it in and deliver content. Or are we taking time to kind of let ideas sink in, to kind of pause, reflect? And I know we're all strapped for time, but we have to think, if we're delivering content and it's not being received, how well has that time been used? So that's where we get into the part where we consider, how do we implant some pause and reflect opportunities during our learning? So again, rather than waiting to the end, how do we stop and do that during the learning process? So I'm going to ask you another stop and jot kind of question, think and write. I want you to jot down on the paper you have in front of you, how has your thinking shifted since we started this webinar today? And what are you still wondering? So again, I'm going to give you 1 minute to jot those things down. How has your thinking shifted? What are you still wondering? About 20 seconds left. I like that idea, Cheryl. Thinking ticket. So now that you've had a chance to think on your own, again, I want you to write two or a couple ideas in the chat that you would like to share. So, how has your thinking shifted since this session started? What is something that you're still wondering? So, Barbara, I love your question. How do you use choice in this process? Barbara, you want to unmute and tell me kind of what you're thinking here?
Sorry. Yeah, so I think choice is really critical when it comes to engagement. And so looking at opportunities for students to think about which one really resonates with them in regards to what it is that everybody's learning.
Yeah. And
So,
that's kind of what we're doing with this prompt. There were really two parts to the prompt. You might have latched on to a thinking shift, or you might have latched on to kind of I'm a little confused. I have more questions than answers at this point. So that is definitely something that we want to consider in our prompts. Even if you look at that first, the set of before learning prompts where we have notice and wonder, students can choose one or more of those. They're not locked into answering all three. So I love that. I love that thought. Thank you for sharing that.
mhm.
Okay. So again, we are pausing now. So we've talked about, how do we get kids kind of using this idea of getting them thinking and bought into the lesson beforehand? How do we build this into the middle parts of our lesson? We already said, going the wrong way. We already said that we use this reflection during learning because it's so powerful at the end. Why not break it into smaller chunks, right? So, again, brain science, I love this idea of brain science, says that, we kind of have a maximum capacity to what we can fit in our brain. And when we as educators try to cram too much in at once, eventually it's full and there's no more and they can't receive any more. There's also a lot of research on how if we teach in smaller chunks and give students a time to pause, reflect, and then move on to another phase of instruction, that also helps for students to really begin to break down that learning and kind of piece it together rather than trying to cram it all in at once. So by stopping and pausing during a lesson, we really are enhancing that memory capacity for students. We're also kind of, if we pause naturally, we're naturally showing them the kind of patterns and breaking points. So if we're looking at that cell, we're talking about, well, let's talk about the things that are all on the edge. Now let's pause and see what we remember. Okay, we've talked about the edges. Now let's talk about what's in the middle, what's holding it all together. So that natural pause helps students also kind of identify patterns and associations that help build their understanding. So during learning, again, there are lots of prompts that you can use. You're going to receive this group of three, even just a prompt discussion. Very often we talk so much during our lessons, not unlike what I'm doing now in this webinar, but we talk so much. Do we ever give students a chance to have a voice? Do we give them a chance to kind of process what they're doing in a verbal way? So before those discussions, why not have them jot a few things down first that they can bring to that discussion? So often when I ask students to turn and talk, which is a great strategy, there's not a lot of talking because they're not sure what to say. They're not sure where to start. So having them get a little time to kind of try out their ideas on paper first, process what they're learning, can be really helpful. But giving them something like this prompt says, jot down 3 or 4 key ideas you want to share when you get with your group. So now everyone's getting that voice, and even the ones who might not raise their hand to share or might be a little less verbal in the group, I can kind of peek over their shoulder and see what their thinking is. Another thing, and this is a good one, big idea, what's the most important thing we've discussed so far? This can be really revealing for you as a teacher, back to that teacher data. When you've been trying to emphasize equivalent fractions and they're talking about, we're talking about adding fractions, you're like, no, we're really talking about equivalent fractions here. So getting them, we're kind of ironing out some of those misconceptions, looking at where we may have left gaps in our instruction or where we have to reconfigure what's left. The beauty of doing this in the middle middle of the lesson is we don't have to wait till tomorrow to make the fix. We can adjust now before we're kind of at the end of the day and like, oh, now that whole 45 minutes was a waste. Now we can only go back and rewind for 10. Okay. And as we did here, another asking them for opportunities for questions is always helpful. This is a great prompt that you can use to pause and just get them to kind of digest what they're learning. Now, I was doing, I'm always looking for more research on this topic. So I found this information with the University of Minnesota that I thought really gave us a great visual of what we're talking about when we talk about that cognitive load. So we've got our working memory. That's kind of what we're using right now. And then we've got our long-term memory. That's where we want our instruction to stick, right? It's great if they can kind of regurgitate it now, but are they going to remember it tomorrow? Or are they going to remember it in a week? Are they going to remember it middle of the year when it's midterm time or when we have, our state assessments? Has that learning stuck? We have unlimited capacity to that long-term memory, but our working memory is limited. So that's why the research suggests really limiting that overload by breaking a lesson into chunks. And it talks about, getting that advanced organizing. So that was our setting the intention, getting them to kind of know what's coming, getting that activating prior knowledge. And then what you see is 10 to 12 minute chunks of instruction broken up by an activity. Whether it's something hands-on, whether it's a discussion, whether it's something that they physically, do or complete, or whether it's one of these kind of quick write opportunities, this is very much in line with that research about how students learn. So I'm going to take a pause now. I'm going to listen to my own advice. Anybody have questions or comments? Feel free to unmute. We are a small group. Feel free to put something in the chat. Okay. So
I was just going to add something, Kristine.
Yeah, go
So
ahead,
I'm
Barbara.
thinking, understanding as a teacher, our students come in with background knowledge. And so it's really important, I think, that these small pauses allow them to retrieve what they know. If we're going so fast, it makes it very difficult for them to be able to summon up that thought, that memory. Or even if they don't know it, you're giving examples of how they can apply it.
Absolutely.
So the power of the pause, it's such an important piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just something that I don't think we do enough because we're in this frantic mode of moving forward, not realizing that by cramming more in, we might not be getting the better results we think we're getting. So I love that. So we've talked about, activating prior knowledge, setting a tone by having students kind of think at the beginning of a lesson. We've talked about having stopping points during the lesson where we can use something that resembles an exit ticket, but mid-lesson, as Cheryl said, a thinking ticket. I love that idea. Again, we've got kind of, we talked about like big idea, one question, all of those things. But let's talk about exit tickets now for real, the real end of lesson. So we've done all these stopping points. Let's think about the current exit tickets that we're using. Are we using exit tickets that pull out information from our students? Because that's where that retrieval happens, when we're pulling information out. If students can guess and be correct, like a multiple choice question or a fill in the blank activity where there's a word bank, we're missing some of that opportunity for the retrieval practice that might happen at the end of a lesson. So a lot of us are asking questions about the content, but are they the right kinds of questions? We really want well-constructed questions that bring that information out. What I think we're also often not doing is asking those reflective kinds of questions. Things where, what surprised you today? What's still confusing for you today? What was really exciting for you today? What do we need to talk more about tomorrow? How do you feel about this homework assignment? Are you ready to do it or you think it's going to be tough? So having them reflect on what they know is also powerful in taking that ownership. And as I said before, the other piece of the exit ticket is kids are not always super engaged the last couple of minutes of class. So this is a great opportunity to have them doing something during those last couple minutes other than kind of zipping up the backpack, looking at the clock. We get them actually active and doing something. So again, I'm going to share with you some prompts. The brain dump is one that you'll see in Powerful Teaching if you happen to grab that book or are familiar with it. It's literally what it sounds like. Write down everything you remember about, and notice it says without notes, because I'm not forcing a correct answer here. If they're using notes, they're not retrieving, and I'm not getting that benefit of retrieval practice. So I love this idea. What do you remember? What's everything you remember about today? That is shown to be a very highly effective practice. Having students write, say, a summary in 3 sentences of what they've learned, exactly 3 sentences. Now they have to really kind of synthesize. They can't just dump everything. They have to now prioritize. So this is a little higher level. And if we also want another higher level option, I love this because but so. So we might say to them, today we've spent a lot of time talking about retrieval practice. Retrieval improves learning. We can all agree on that. I want you to finish that statement with a because, a but, or a so phrase. Now you're getting students to extend that baseline knowledge and level up into some cause effect, some associations, some connections. And you can see on the screen an example of what that might look like if a student is really engaging in that activity. So these are some examples of higher order thinking kind of exit tickets that I don't know that we always use as effectively as we could be. Now, one concern, and I'm surprised nobody asked this, but Kristine, how do you keep up with all of these? Are you collecting and grading them? I don't have time for that. No need to collect these. It is an over-the-shoulder check. This isn't about a grade. This isn't about getting, something to put in the assignment book. This is about student learning. So walking around, looking over the shoulders and getting that sense of where students are, what they know, who do I need to group with whom for our next activity is very powerful. It's not perfect. It's quick. But we can't do everything perfectly all the time. It will give us a sense of where we're going with our learning. If we also want to make sure that students are not, say they brain dump and they're putting wrong information down, that's concerning. So it's very important with that retrieval practice that kids are getting immediate feedback. So there's nothing wrong with just going over it as a class and having students self-correct. Have them mark up their papers. That is more beneficial to learning than collecting the paper, looking at it tonight, handing it back tomorrow. There's no ownership in that. What we want is that immediate feedback. So whether it's just looking over the shoulders and making some instructional decisions, or whether it's guiding the students through some kind of a class check and having them physically, check off what you've done, make changes, make adjustments, that's really powerful. And that's what you see here in this sample is an example of a student who did this. This was a middle school student writing about the American Revolution. You can see their initial answer above the line. And then below that, you can see they kind of drew a line. Below that line, you can see what they added during the discussion with the class. And what they added really revealed some of the gaps in what they knew going into this assignment. But you can also see they have stars by things that were emphasized. They have checks by things in their own writing. This is powerful note-taking for students. And now they have this tangible thing that they can refer back to. And I have visible thinking in my classroom. Now, for those of you who know about Collins writing, you may know the terms type 1 and type 2, the quick writes we've been talking about today in the Collins world. We refer to them as either type 1 or type 2 based on how we're using them. If we're just kind of capturing ideas, that's a type 1. If we're looking for correct ideas because we've taught something, that's a type 2. You're free to use that language, and a lot of our teachers love using that common language. Any of these prompts can be used with your students, whether you fully understand the language of Collins or not. These are going to be beneficial in your classrooms, however and whenever you use them. So we're at the point where we need to end our lesson. We're going to think about an exit ticket. So this time, I want you to go directly into the chat because we've had a couple rounds of practice and I want to make sure that everybody has time to address something. What is one idea or strategy that you will take away from this webinar? And how will you apply it? So I'm going to give everybody a minute to type something into the chat. A few more seconds. Okay. So while anyone else is finishing, Cheryl, I love that you liked the 3 sentence summary. That's always a great strategy, and it gets kids beyond just listing words. So it really gives them some depth. Barbara, I love your reminder about how type 1 writing really builds student confidence and fluency because they don't have to be right. They just have to try. And that's what we want in our classes. Too many students hold back on participating, hold back on making an effort because they're afraid of being wrong. So I appreciate that, that kind of call out to type 1 writing and giving permission students to just try. I think that's really important. So thank you for sharing that. You're going to be receiving via email copies of 2 resources. One is the Making Thinking Visible, which you already had a preview of, the 3 different, before, during, and after prompts. If we have any administrators or school leaders who are watching, I'm also going to give you a version of this that you can use with teachers at faculty meetings. So just because you don't have a classroom, you might have a staff that you want to learn or take away something during your meetings. This is a great way for you to model excellent classroom strategies with your teachers, give everyone a voice, see where they're coming from, and really help them to remember what you are trying to convey in your meeting. So you will be receiving both of those items in your inboxes, so keep an eye out for those. And remember, we are here to talk about how we can go beyond that exit ticket. How do we make reflection more routine? How do we integrate this kind of work into our day-to-day and make it manageable? And I hope this has given you some ideas for how you might do that. If you are still with us, you can scan this code and that will take you to a means of registering for our newsletter. Most of you already have our newsletter because you're here, but also it'll enter you in a giveaway for one of our desktop guides. It will give you options for following us on social media so you can stay connected beyond today. Once again, I thank everybody for being here. I really am grateful for having people who come out during the summer and tune in to learn with us. So thank you for being here, and feel free to stay on if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see everyone soon.